Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. I love you all. My name is miahtheking, and ghosts are really bad liars simply because you can always see right through them. Thank you so much for clicking on my video. I know it's not something that you would normally do, and might be wondering why you're sticking around. Well, if the funny one-liners at the start of each video don't do it for you, maybe perhaps because I'm one of the few reviewers out there who can help you figure out if you need a game in 10 minutes or less. Don't believe me? Then stick around and I'll prove it. Now then, today we're taking a look at a game just released on Steam called Hyper-Light Breaker, an action-adventure co-op game developed by Heart Machine and published by Art Games, released in early access and selling for $30 flippin' dollars. Seems to be the popular price tag recently. So what even is this game? Well, to save you some time, let me just get right out there. It's an extraction shooter roguelike kind of game. I'll get into it further on, but that's the gist of it. What's the story? I don't know. The game doesn't have one. What's the point? I don't know. The game doesn't have one. What's your purpose? I don't know. The game didn't give me one, so I can't really let y'all know either. So as always, let's go into the good and the bad, starting off first with the good. So the first good point I want to talk about was the game's stability. Now yes, I did have a few frame rate drops here and there, but nothing like the last game I played. They were very few and far between and easily manageable. Everything else ran perfectly fine, which was surprising for an early access title, especially one with this much action and speed in it. The game played smooth, it ran smooth, and I didn't experience any kind of freezing, crashing, or glitching, at least none obvious enough for me to witness. Next up for the positives is the gameplay. I have good and bad to say, but first, the gameplay goes as follows, which will seem very similar to other roguelike games or extraction shooter games y'all may have played. You have a hub. In this hub, you have storage and upgrades for your character and your gear. As you progress, you can unlock newer and bigger, better upgrades for both yourself and your base. When you traverse into the world, you have objectives and lootable stuff, most of which will be lost upon when you die and return to the hub. Continue progressing over and over, dying over and over, until you get strong enough to not die instantly with all this large objective thing hanging over your head that one day you may complete. Sound familiar? Strange how on the Steam store page it makes absolutely no mention of this, and I checked twice. But that's the gist of the gameplay. You have a melee default attack, you have ranged attacks from temporary weapons you can either buy or find, you have abilities based on what weapon you're using, and a hoverboard which acts as your sprint function. You also have a glider for falling down large holes and a parry mechanic. The maps are indeed procedurally generated, I checked, and it's quite an interesting mechanic. But now I really want to go into the bad of the gameplay, but before I go into the good. Or maybe I'll do both at the same time, I don't know, let's just see how it goes. So the gameplay does have potential, that much is very, very true. I could definitely see that this game could be quite addictive and engaging to some. The combat is almost there. It's so close to being good, but it has a pretty significant flaw, and to me, in my opinion, it's the dodge mechanic. It doesn't really have one. You can dodge using your sprint button, but if you hold the button just a smidge too long, your character hops on his hoverboard and gets hit, which knocks him over, which then allows you to get hit more. The dodge, or rather the sprint button, which you use to dodge, also only dodges in straight lines. This makes dodging enemy attacks very ineffective. As for the parry mechanic, it only seems to work when facing the enemy, and since you'll always find yourself fighting more than 4 opponents at once, they're always going to get around or behind you. Trying to time your parry mechanic to each of the 4 unique opponents' timing is also incredibly difficult to do, since your parry only lasts for literally a second. Maybe not even that long. The damage the enemies do to you is also very significant without any real way of healing your character. So with a bad parry mechanic, an incomprehensible dodge mechanic, and massive damage without a way to heal, and you're going to find yourself struggling against the most basic of enemies. If they were to clean it up a bit and make it a bit more logical, then it'd be a more fun gameplay. And when I say that it's hard or it's difficult, I don't mean it's hard from just the difficulty, I mean it's hard due to mechanical design. I've played Elden Ring and Kingdom Come Deliverance and a bunch of other games with really quirky or hard gameplay, and after a while I can start to figure out how it works and do fairly decent. But with awful gameplay mechanics, it doesn't matter how much you play or how much you learn, it's always going to be an issue and it's always going to be hard, and that's not acceptable. Then you've got the lack of direction, the lack of plot or interest, which leads to a lack of immersion, and I could go on. But now, let's talk about the good of the gameplay. We'll get into the rest of that later. The gameplay does have a solid foundation for the combat, as I said, with a plethora of unique mechanics and interesting ways to approach each situation. Each weapon has a different fighting styles with different combos and abilities, giving each player a different experience. It has co-ops you can easily jump on with a friend and play the game, while at the same time each of you having a different way to approach combat to either help or hinder each other, however you're feeling that day. The hoverboard is really cool, and the enemies are very unique and engaging as well as varied. The maps are procedural, as I stated earlier, meaning each attempt will have a different layout when you run out of lives. Which reminds me, the game doesn't just reset if you die once, it's a little more forgiving than that. You are given 4 lives, and only when those run out does everything refresh. But death still comes with losses, so don't take it lightly. I think that maybe if they could iron out the combat and make it a bit more player friendly, then it'd end up being really interesting. But as of right now, it's more of a chore than anything else. But still, that's why it's in the positives though. You might be wondering why it's still in the positives though. And simply because the combat itself, when you take every other part of the gameplay out of it, and if you just look at the combat, it's so close to being good. Like, it is fun, it is engaging, it is interesting. It's kind of like Dark Souls combat, but it's also very fast paced. So it's definitely interesting, it just needs some balancing, and that's why it's in the positives. Next up for the positives is the sound design. Now, I place it here because it's average, much like the rest of the game. It's not terrible, but it's not terrific either. The music is kind of bland and average, coming and going as like it's supposed to. The sound effects are pretty much what you'd expect them to be, but not anything super awesome or quirky or fun. There's no voice acting, and there's not really any ambiance, so it's lacking in some regards as well. So it's here in the positives simply because it's not offensive, and that's pretty much it. And last but not least is the graphics. Now again, while the game doesn't have any kind of fantastical graphical designs, it does have a very pleasant feeling while you're playing it, though it does tend to go towards a certain type of shading, like reds and purples. It seems to lean more in that direction. And it does have detail in some of the right places. It's got good color contrast and shading, and it's not offensive, but like the sound design, it's good enough, I suppose, for what it is, but it doesn't really stand out. It's not really super amazing. It's just passable, and that's the best way to describe it. Alright, so that's all I can think of to say positively about the game. Now we got to go into the negatives. But before that, I would highly encourage you to click that bell right down there. Why? Because I review all types of games at all types of times. And you never know when I might review a game that you've been missing out on your whole life. So hit the bell and stay informed. I'm just trying to help you out here. Now then, on to the negatives. So the first negative point is the tutorial. It's non-existent. The game does not have one. Perhaps the devs don't know what tutorial means or what it's meant to be. I don't know. It's not just pages of dialogue you can sift through optionally as you choose and read for an hour. That's called Wikipedia. That's what this game gives you though. They plop you down not knowing what anything is, not knowing what you're supposed to do, and not really explaining anything other than the basics of the game, and even the basics they teach doesn't cover anything. Like, half the stuff I had to learn on my own through experimentation because they just never taught me anything. And if you've been watching my channel, then you know that tutorials are a big pet peeve of mine, and it always irks me when they get it wrong. Well, I haven't seen a game with this bad of a tutorial in a very, very long time. So that sucks. I hate it. Fix it. Give me a tutorial. Next up for the negative points is the user interface. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. It's incredibly confusing, it doesn't make any sense, it's not interesting or fun to look at, and makes the entire gameplay feel far more frustrating, confusing, and annoying than it needs to be. Half the shit here isn't even in English, or any language for that matter. It's just symbols and marks and shit that I guess are supposed to be natural to the world? Maybe? I don't know, but we still can't read it, and I don't know what it means. As far as I'm concerned, it's not giving character to the world, it's not making me curious, it's just annoying the hell out of me that I can't read half this shit. Having to crawl through this sludge for every little thing makes the game incredibly frustrating for me. Next up is the price. Again, another game saying they want $30 for a game that doesn't deserve it yet. And again, I gotta point it out. Number one, the game is in early access, which means it could be abandoned. This is an investment. It could be changed for the worse, or it could end up not changing, or fixing any of its issues. They want us to beta test their game, and in the past, believe it or not everybody, game devs used to pay people to beta test games for them, not the other way around. This doesn't have voice acting, it's unfinished, it needs some obvious polishing, and they want $30 for it. Hell, when I went to buy the game, I couldn't even buy the game on its own. Here, I'll put it on the screen for you. See? Look at this. You can't even buy the game alone. You have to buy the two games together. Like, you have to. There's no other option for it. And look at this. Apparently the base game is not even available, and the other game is only worth 20 bucks. So is this game only worth 20 bucks and I paid 30? They didn't even give me an option. At time of posting this video, it hasn't changed and it feels like some bullshit. I didn't want the other game, but they don't care, and I was forced to buy it anyway. So for multiple obvious reasons, I severely disagree with the pricing, the bundle, and the whole shebang. And last but not least for the negatives is the overall missing point. The lack of purpose, the lack of plot, the lack of lore or understanding. There's nothing here. There's no plot. There's no point here. There's just absolutely no reason to be here or to be doing anything. There's no descriptions. It's just a big blank open slate with absolutely nothing there. I have no idea who I am or what I am. I have no idea what I'm doing or why. I have no idea where this is. I have no idea at all what's going on, and I hate games that do that. First thing I said when I started playing this game was, I hate games like this. And to clarify, it means I hate games that take an already overused concept that's been done a million times before, put a small twist on it, give it a new skin, and then market it to people like it's something new and unique. Maybe if there was a plot, a purpose, a point, or something unique about it other than the hoverboard, it'd be fine. I'd be saying, well, it might be like all those other games, but at least the world is interesting, at least the story is decent. But nope, nothing like that here. This makes everything you do feel pointless. It makes you not get invested and not really care about anything. And when that happens, there's no player retention. And if there's no player retention, then no one will come back to your game. Okay, so that's all the negatives I could think of to say about the game, and you might be thinking to yourself, well shit, he must really hate this game then. Well, you'd be wrong. I actually don't hate the game. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, it's bad, but it's not that bad. I think it's an early access and it needs a lot of work. That's what I think. Overall, the idea here is kind of interesting. The gameplay mechanics are kind of fun and interesting, and there's a lot of potential and possibilities here that could end up becoming something really spectacular. But as of this moment, the game's just not fun. I can't really say that the game is good for what it might be. I can only judge it based on its current state. And in its current state, I just didn't find it fun or interesting. I think they should definitely get rid of that bundle shit, lower the price, and add a reason for players to keep coming back to this game rather than any of the other much more better roguelike extraction shooters out there. They should also add more options in there, because there's no way to invert mouse like I saw, which some people care about, no way to adjust sensitivity or other settings that players might want, and it just shows how incomplete the game is. And I've heard online that even the online connectivity is really broken, so the only interesting aspect of this, besides its rough around the edges combat, is also broken. Look, as of right now, it's definitely not worth your time or money. It's very unfinished, it's very bland, it's very boring with a slightly interesting combat mechanic, especially not at that price. So do yourself a favor, and if you're super interested in this game, then just put it on your wish list and wait 6 months or a year for it to cook some more. Maybe then it'll be better. But as of right now, I definitely recommend everyone just pass on it. Alright? Sorry that this video is taking longer than 10 minutes. I almost never do this, but I had a lot to say here. Please forgive me. But that's all the time I got for this video, everybody. Thanks so much for watching, with a special thanks to those of you who stuck around to the end. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you all again on my next adventure. So until then, I bid you all farewell.